Assalamu alaikum students, how are you all? Hope that you are having an amazing day. I'm Muhammad Naeem Amin Bhatti, and today the topic of our discussion is Transcendentalism, and we will discuss different points here. Let's have our learning outcomes. We are going to discuss them. The very first point, we will discuss the definitions of Transcendentalism at the different ways, and after that we will discuss its features and its meaning, the meaning of both types, the apparent meaning and the hidden meaning, the literal meanings also, and different contextual meanings and used by different persons at different societies, especially in Native American societies. Then we will discuss the causes of this movement, that why the transcendentalism was started, and in which were the circumstances in which it was started. And after that we will discuss its major characteristics, its subject matters of transcendentalism, and then at the second last point we will discuss the beliefs of the transcendentalism. And there are various types of beliefs which resembles with the romanticism. And after that we will discuss the major figures, the literary persons at that time who were supporting this movement, and also the major transcendentalists who were supporting these ideas. We will discuss them as a major figures. And after that we will discuss the anti-transcendentalism, and then we will discuss the last points of our lecture and we will end it. So let's have a start first of all with the definition of transcendentalism. Basically it is an idealistic, philosophical and social movement was started in New England around 1836 AD. Basically, New England is a state of United States of America. As we have discussed in our previous lectures also, it was under the supervision and colonization of United Kingdom or England. But now this is the part of United States of America nowadays. And basically the movement of transcendentalism was a reaction of the rationalism, that the rationalists were demanding the reasons for the scientific happening. They were of the opinion that there is a solid reason behind every happening. A person should be rationalized, a person should be logical in his manners. But the transcendentalists were of the belief that though logic is pretty much important, but they were influenced by the romanticism, by the Platonism, and by the Kantian philosophy, which deals that no logic is required for the metaphysical objects, that metaphysics always deals with some type of things which to some extent doesn't want any reason behind any happening. So it taught that divinity pervades all the nature and humanity, that humanity and nature are under the influence of divinity. And the progressive views on the feminism and the communal living were also discussed in the transcendentalism. And especially the feminism, I will define feminism as the advocacy of the women right, the supremacy of the rights of female but equal to the male person, that is called the feminism. And the communal living was at that time the factor which was affecting the society, that communists were taking over the world. They had their own logic that communism and communal living was beneficial for the human being. So that's why the transcendentalism was also affected by the humanists also. If we talk about its initiators or its major figures, the very first comes to our mind is R.W. Emerson, that is the Ralph Waldo Emerson. And after him, the Henry David Thoreau were central figures, and they are the person who are marked as the initiators of the transcendentalist movement. Now, if you have another definition about the transcendentalism, is that was a system. It was not only a movement, but it was a full-fledged system. It was a different movements having one system at all. Or you can say that it was a bunch of the movements. We have included the feminism in it also, we have included the romanticism, we have included the Platonism in also, and also the communist point of view. So that was a system developed by the Immanuel Kant in order to understand the nature of reality. That somehow some people thinks that the logic is always a reality, but other people may be also of the opinion that the divinity is the ultimate reality of this world. Like romanticism poets, especially I will talk about Keats, he was of the opinion that the reality of this world is beauty and truth. Truth is beauty, beauty is truth. So that was his famous verse. So similarly, if we talk about the American Native Society, they were of the opinion that the nature of reality examine and analyzes the reasoning process. That always it is in the deft hands of the nature that how to start the reasoning process, how to be logical in inductive manner or in deductive manner. They don't negated the logical things at all, but they approved them through the hands of nature. And it governs the nature of experience, that the experience isn't only important, the nature of experience is always important. Reasoning isn't only important, the process of reasoning is always important. That reality isn't only important, the nature of reality is always important. And above all, the understanding isn't important, that the thorough understanding about a thing is always important. So transcendentalism was a comprehensive type of system of development about the understanding of the nature, about the understanding of the reasoning process, about the understanding of the nature of reality, about the understanding of the nature of experience. If we talk in simple words, the philosophical movement that started in 1830s, I will say that 1830s and 1840s, because the year is 1836 in this manner. The belief was that most important reality is what is sensed, that the reality is of this world isn't only the virtue, the reality of this world isn't only the nature, the reality of this world isn't only the reasoning, but the reality of this world is each and everything which could be sensed with uh, anything, what that we call the intuitive or intuition, that it is from divine things, it is from the divinity. These subject matters told us the important reality that what we have in our five senses and approximately also in our sixth sense, that is the reality of life. The things that we touch, the things that we taste, the things that we listen, the things that we see, or the things that we smell are the ultimate reality of this world. So that's why the most important thing in this world is reality. That was the simple view of the transcendentalism movement. Rather than what is tough, such is basically what is thought, such as the scientific knowledge, they were also of the opinion that there is always a solid scientific happening. There is always a solid scientific reason behind every happening, that a reason always generates the number of nature of realities, that there could be different realities in the different truths, that every truth has its own reality. In other words, I'll give you an example that the point of view can never be wrong, but it could be different. The point of view of two persons might be different from each other, but both of them are describing to us the reality. Both of the point of views always describe the real life experiences in their own personal capacity. That every person in this world is a true person or a truthful person with his own or her own point of view. We cannot negate the point of view of the other people at all. If we talk about the causes of this movement, they are pretty much simple. They were inspired by the English and European romantic authors, especially from the romantic authors that we call them the romantic poets, William Wordsworth, H.T. Coleridge, and Byron, Shelley, and Keats, etc. They were pretty much inspired by those romantic writers, because they were writing their poetry before 1830s or in between the 1830s. So that's why that movement was pretty much famous at that time. And in 1843, because William Wordsworth was made the poet laureate, so that's why it was more enhanced in even the other parts of the Europe and England also, not in the native America only, but also in the English parts and the European romantic authors. They inspired the American writers at that time. The American writers were very much inspired from the romantic authors. So that was a form of the American romanticism, we can call it that. Same, there was a case for the English romanticism. There was the same thing as for the American romanticism, that they also talk about the newness, they also talk about the nature, they also talk about the new youthful ideas, they also talk about the truth, they also talk about the reality, the truth, and the beauty. They were in the finding position of the ultimate reality of this world. If we talk about the transcendentalism it arose when it did for the several reasons, that it was a humanistic philosophy. That was the philosophy of humankind. That was the philosophy of the in-depth feelings of the human being. And it was exploring the human being according to their subject matters. And it talks about the individual right, and that was at the center of this universe, that man is the center of this universe. And this sentence, as we have discussed in the history of English literature, and especially in the revival and rebirth that was called the Renaissance. So this romanticism, American romanticism, was also in a manner inspired by the English Renaissance also, because individual right, man is the center of this universe, man is the central point of this universe. That same sentence we have discussed in the history of English literature in Renaissance. So we can say that American romanticism is actually the American Renaissance in that manner. So all of things were adopted from the English writers. So that's why there was a complete influence of the English writers on the American writers as well. Now we have a look upon the characteristics of the Transcendentalism. Both the Emerson and Thoreau valued the following key aspects of Transcendentalism. The very first characteristic of this movement was equality. Either it was through the justice, it was through the equity, it was through the equality or the equal distribution of the human rights or the other rights as well. So it was focused upon the human equality, that all the human beings are equal for each other, that all the male persons in this world are equal to the female persons of this world. All the men and women are created equal, and it is related to Islam, because before this movement, approximately 1300 or 1400 years ago, Islam has described the human rights according to this manner, that all the women and men are created equal. No one is superior than the other one. Not a black person has any superiority over a white person, or not a white person has any superior values than the black person. All are equal, and basically all of them are the offsprings of Adam, and Adam was created out of clay. That is a fundamental truth of our life, of our Islamic values also, that now has been described to the Christianity after 1300 years or 1400 years later. After that, the second characteristic of this movement was individualism, that it was talking about the rights of individual. It was not talking about the social manners or the social parameters or societies. It wasn't talking about in the party matter, but this movement has its own subject that was called the individualism, that from person to person, from every human being to, and from one human being to another human being, they were called upon, or they were analyzed like the other individual of this world, to have the same rights as the other people have. The poor or the rich has no difference according to this movement. The third thing here to discuss was self-reliance. They relied in their self. That is a concept which was called by Allama Iqbal after the 30 or 40 years of this movement, which was called the Khudi. So this self-reliance concept realizes to that the human being can do or can achieve each and everything if he or she wants to. That nothing is impossible in this world. Nothing is impossible for an individual. That was the self-reliance for a person, to depend on our own powers. And for the nation of America, it was very necessary to depend on their own willpowers, on their own native societies as well. The fourth point was integrity, which was called at that time the fulfillment of brotherhood, the selflessness, the faithfulness with the country, the faithfulness with the nation, the faithfulness with the other human being of the Native American society, and the faithfulness of being the superior person and the superior nation for the other nations. That is a like dream type thing, which was called by the Martin Luther King Jr. in his lesson I Have a Dream, we have discussed in first year English subject. So that was a form of integrity, equality, individualism, self-reliance, self-confidence, to be able to overcome the difficulties of that time, the difficulties of that hour. And above all, they talk about the optimism. That was a positive thinking in their mind, having that positive outlook according to each and every aspect, towards each and every problem. And they were well aware of the responsibilities of life. They were optimistic about each and everything. And after all, they both, like Emerson and Thoreau, both of them demonstrated these values in their philosophical writings also regarding the transcendentalism. Now we have a look on the major subject matters and features of this movement. The essay or the subjective nature was their main course in their transcendentalism movement. They focused upon the prose. They don't even, I will not say that they don't focus upon the poetry, they focus upon the poetry also. But the main key of their success was their essays. They convey their ideas through the essay. They wrote the essays on different subject matters also. After that, they talk about the poetry, and what the nature of the poetry was, that they always talk about the nature in their poetry, like the romantic writers of England at that time, the contemporary writer of the England were doing at that time. I have named those writers like Keats, Shelley, Byron, Coleridge, Wordsworth were talking a lot about the nature. So the poetry of that transcendentalism movement was a major tool to convey the thoughts to the individuals, and the poetry was the one of the platform through which they have inspired the people of the Native America. So the third point was intuition. Intuition, that thing which is divine and it has been put into the human mind through divinity, that Allah Almighty, or in Christianity, if we talk about the Christianity, that God has put that specific thought in the mind and the psychology of that person. It was according to the psychological discussion, which was in the form of intuition between one individual and between the God. After that, the subject matter was correspondence, the correspondence to the responsibilities of life, the correspondence to be superior at that time, the correspondence not to feel any type of inferiority complex, the correspondence to be the one of the major talkative person about the human rights and the human values, the correspondence to be responsible for the government of this whole world, for taking the government of this whole world. And above all, the correspondence is to make the English language an international language at that time. And individualism, we have discussed this point earlier in the previous slide, and after that they talk a lot about the nature. Basically, both of these concepts, the individualism and nature, are interrelated with each other. An individual person has his or her own nature, and a nature could decide the individualistic thoughts. So if we deal with the definition of the nature according to the Wordsworth, who was an English writer, through him the American writers were very much inspired, that he says that nature is a soothing agent, nature is a teacher, nature is a preacher, nature is a nurse, and nature is each and everything that we can talk about. If we think that nature is cruel to us, that will be cruel to us. If we think that nature will be beneficial to us, it will be beneficial to us. Nature can be decided by each and every individual according to his or her own parameters, according to his or her own requirements nature could be defined. And after that, the Unitarian Church was also resembling with the Transcendentalism movement, because the Unitarian Church has the same goals, same subject matters, same features, same requirements, same characteristics as the Transcendentalism movement people had. The Transcendentalists were of the opinion that the Unitarian Church isn't different from them, but it is a part of us. And above all, they talk about the social reforms in the United States of America. That this movement has described that our society isn't doing well these days, it has to be reformed in different manner. There was a social reform in their judicial system, in their justice system, in their police system, in their administrative basis, in their literature, in their even dresses, in their language, in their manners, in their morals, in their all the values of the life. There was a type of social reform that they had reformed themselves, and they had reformed their society through different features, through different subject matters, and through having different subjects in their minds, having the psyche to change the society, to change the condition and norms of the society. They were fighting at the front line for their society. So they were succeeded in this. If we had an example that the transcendentalism is a belief, man is at his best when he is independent. So independent thoughts are required, independent feelings are required, independent emotions are very necessary, independent human rights are very necessary for that manner. And that was not a part of organized religion or the politics, but it was truly a civil movement. It was truly a movement that was of the civilization, for the change of the traditions, for the change of the norm and conditions, for the change of their values, for the change of their moral laws, codes, and conducts at that time. What was its origin? That is started when the Unitarianism took hold at Howard University. If we say that the Unitarianism and the Transcendentalism were started in a parallel manner, that would not be wrong. There were elections in the Howard University in which the Henry Wares as the Hollis Professor of Divinity in 1805, then he was succeeded. And before the 30 odd years of the Transcendentalism, the Unitarianism was having an effect on that. So the starting point of this Transcendentalism is that point through which the Unitarianism was started. So we can see that both of Unitarianism and Transcendentalism are sisters to each other in this manner, and sister movements to each other. So John Thornton Kirkland was selected as the president in 1810 of the Unitarianism through Harvard University. But if we talk about the Transcendentalism, these were the forefathers of the Transcendentalists. They were the people who given birth to the Transcendentalism. After that, we discuss the Transcendentalism and Unitarianism. The Transcendentalists were not content with the sobriety mildness. Same was case with the Unitarianism. Instead, they longed for the more intense, the spiritual experience that discussed the metaphysical thoughts at that time. We have talked about the metaphysical English poets also. So that was a movement which was dealing with the spiritual manners, the metaphysical things, the things beyond this physical world, the things which were dealing with the spirituality, the things which were dealing with the divinity, the subject matters that was leading us towards the God and the deeds of God, the virtues of God, the things which were leading us through spirituality towards the true meanings of God. That was a spiritual experience, and it was both in the Transcendentalism and Unitarianism also. Both of them were, both of these movements were focusing upon these points. And it was not born as the counter movement of Unitarianism, as I have discussed earlier that, but it was as a parallel movement to the very ideas introduced by the Unitarians. Even the ideas which were, and ideas and beliefs which were produced by the Unitarians were further proceeded and preached by the Transcendentalism people or the Transcendentalists. And there was a major idea in the both of the Unitarianism and Transcendentalism, which was the respect for the human capabilities, that you might give the due respect to the human being for their capabilities. Every person cannot get all the capabilities and necessities for the living of life. Every person is basically expert in his or her own capabilities. So we have to pay regard, we have to pay the respect to those capabilities, and positively we have to admire the individual capabilities of the human being, that every human being is expert in one thing or another. Now, if we talk about the Transcendentalism Club, the club was basically formed in Cambridge, Massachusetts on September 8, 1836 by the prominent New England intellectuals George Putnam from 1807 to 1878, and the Unitarian minister Roxbury, and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Frederick Henry Hayes were basically the major club members at that time. All of them were not only the public figures but also the well recognized type of the writer. They were the most unique writers of their time. And especially I will talk about the R.W. Emerson, who was one of the finest person in debate, and his written essays and poetries as well. So these club members were increasing the awareness of people regarding the Transcendentalism movement, and they were also preaching the Unitarian ideas in the form of in the coding of the Transcendentalism movement. The other club members were Amos Bronson, Alcott, Orest Brownson, and similarly Mr. Parker, Mr. Thoreau, William Henry, similarly the Freeman Clark, and the female members. If we talk about the female members of this club, they were Sophia Ripley, Margaret Fuller, Elizabeth Peabody, Ellen Stigris Hopo, and Caroline Tappan. These were the female members of this club. From 1840, the group published in their journal the Dial. Especially I will talk about the Caroline Stigris Tappan. She was the effective female member at that time in 1840s, and she was the activist in the journal the Dial, in which all of these members used to write their subject matters, as we have discussed the previous ones. Okay, let's talk about its second wave of the Transcendentalism movement. By the late 1840s, especially near about to 1850s, when in England, if we talk about the England, the Mr. William Wordsworth was the poet laureate at that time in the United Kingdom, England. So here in the United States of America, Emerson believed that the movement was dying out. So they used to start its second wave at that time, like we have discussed in the feminism, that there are the different waves of feminism. Similarly, there are the two waves of the Transcendentalism. Here in our lecture we are going to discuss. Its second wave was after the death of Margaret Fuller in 1850, the same year when the William Wordsworth was died. And Emerson wrote that it is that she represents an interesting R and group in American cultivation, that she has cultivated the mind of the people of United States. And she was talking about the youthful ideas. She was talking about the truth and beauty. She was talking about the same subject matters that the romanticism at that time was talking about. And especially the second wave of transcendentalists was consisting upon Mercer Conway and Octavius Brooke Forthegum, Samuel Longfellow, and Franklin B. Sanborn. These were the major figures who were creating the second wave of second waves of transcendentalism at that time, and it was started after the death of Margaret Fuller in 1850, or you can say that in late 1840s. Now we talk about the beliefs of the transcendentalists. They were strongly believing on the power of the individual, as we have discussed earlier, that each and every individual has his or her own power, that they are expert in some manners that the other person couldn't be expert in. It is primarily concerned with the personal freedom of the people, that people are free personally. They are free to do each and everything. Their beliefs are closely linked with those of the Romantics. We have discussed this point also earlier, that these beliefs were indulging with the beliefs of the Romantic people of native England at that time, and also the native United States at that time. But they differ by an attempt to embrace, or at least to not to oppose, the empiricism of the science. They were not going to collide with the science. They were not going against the scientific ideas of that time, and even they were not even the challenging the scientific discoveries at that time, because literature has its own importance, science has its own importance, and arts has its own importance. The scientist and a philosopher has the same ideas to discover. That was the subject matter of the Transcendentalism movement. If we further divide these beliefs in different parts, the very first one, that the transcendental knowledge, that knowledge was far beyond the in the native world, or the far beyond the physical world, the supernatural knowledge, the metaphysical knowledge, the spiritual knowledge, the divine knowledge, the scientific knowledge, the knowledge of philosophy, the each and every type of knowledge was superior at that time. They talk about the individualism, the individualistic thoughts, the individualistic natures, the individualistic of not only the human being, but also the individualistic thoughts and the beliefs also. Every person is independent, his or her belief. That was the base of the transcendentalism. Indian religions were also discussed at that time, like Islam as a major Indian religion, Hinduism as the major Indian religion, Buddhism as a major Indian religion, and similarly the other religion, Sikhism, was also discussed at that time, because there is a lot of spirituality in all of these religions, especially in Islam and Sikhism. There is a lot of spirituality that the transcendentalists has discussed, and after all they were idealized in each and every manner. They were discussing the idealism in their own way, and it was basically a part of their belief that idealism leads us towards the God and importance of nature. So the transcendentalists were basically can be described as an American outward of the English Romanticism, that it was basically an outgrowth of English Romanticism. It wasn't less than the English Romanticism, and they were colliding with each other at that time. Now we talk about the major figures. We have discussed them also earlier, that Emerson, Thoreau, Fuller, Alcott, and some other prominent transcendentalists include the Alcott, Timothy Brooks, and Brownson, Channing, John Very, Walt Whitman, etc. They were the major figures at that time. Now we discuss the concept of anti-transcendentalism. It was the concept at that time when the people was talking about the transcendentalism. So there is always a place of opposition in any type of beliefs, in any type of the movement. So it was basically a belief against, it was basically a negation against the transcendentalism. It was basically the resistance against the transcendentalism that was called the anti-transcendentalism. It was an opposition movement to the transcendentalists, and these writers never supported the beauty of nature. They even not supported a single belief of the transcendentalist. They were having their own views about the nature. They doesn't even supported the kindness of humans and government. They basically consisted of only the Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville, and they focused on the limitations and the potential destructiveness of the human spirit. They thought that, anti-transcendentalists thought that transcendentalism was moving them towards the destruction, but that was wrong at that time. So that's why it wasn't so succeeded. Transcendentalism was prevailing each and everywhere, like English Romanticism has prevailed each and everywhere. There was a lot of discussion about the individual priorities, individual independence, thoughts of individuals, and there was a lot of talk about the nature, the kindness of humans, the loyalty to the government. But the transcendentalism was proved a fruit of that time for the people of United States of America, and it was still deeply rooted even in the native times also. If you have to discuss different type of discussion methods, or the different type of the questions, you have some type of confusions in your mind, you can ask to me in comments box below. Our further studies, we have reference on your screen, and you can concern to these books as well, these sites as well, and especially you can get a good deal of knowledge from your recommended books also. But having a question in your mind, if you are having any question in your mind, you can ask to me in your comment box. So that's goodbye from me. Hopefully you will be stay at home, and you will be stay safe, inshallah, and we will meet in next lecture, inshallah. So for now, that's it from me. Goodbye. Allah Hafiz.